On July 4, 2025, sudden flash floods swept through Texas Hill Country, devastating summer camps and local communities. Michael searches the debris for his 12-year-old daughter after receiving a message every parent dreads. His child is missing from summer camp after it was ravaged by floods. But behind the headlines, this is the story of one father standing alone by the rising floodwaters, searching for his child.
I'm standing in the pouring rain, my boots sinking deep into the muddy banks of a swollen river in the Texas Hill Country, shouting my daughter's name into the darkness. The floodwaters roar like a freight train, drowning out my cries, and my heart feels like it's being ripped apart. Emma, my 12-year-old. My world has been missing for 36 hours since a flash flood tore through her summer camp. My phone is useless. My clothes are soaked through. And the only thing louder than the storm is the panic clawing at my chest. I haven't prayed in years, not since the divorce had shattered what little faith I had left. But standing here, helpless in the storm, I find myself doing the one thing I swore I'd never do again. Begging God for a miracle. I don't know if He's listening, but right now, I'm out of options. Let me tell you how I got here. A broken man who once swore he'd never trust God again found himself pleading for His mercy in the middle of a flood. I used to think I had life figured out. I'm Michael Rodriguez, a 52-year-old civil engineer from Houston, Texas. I built my world on things I could measure and control for most of my adult life. Blueprints, budgets, timelines. Those were my language. I spent decades designing bridges and roads, solving problems with math and logic. And I applied that same approach to my life. Success meant a good job, a lovely house in the suburbs, and a family I could provide for. For a while, I had all of that, but looking back, I can see the cracks forming long before everything fell apart. Growing up in a Hispanic American family, faith was as much a part of our lives as the smell of my mom's tamales on Christmas Eve. We went to Mass every Sunday, prayed before meals, and had a little statue of the Virgin Mary on the living room shelf. As a kid, I believed in God, because that's what you did. It was as natural as breathing, but as I got older, faith started to feel like a routine I followed to keep my parents happy. By the time I was in college, studying engineering at UT Austin, God was more of a background character in my story, a name I mentioned out of habit, not conviction. My real religion was achievement. I graduated with honors, landed a solid job at a civil engineering firm, and married Elena, my college sweetheart. We had Emma, our daughter, and for a while, life felt like a blueprint I'd drawn up perfectly. I worked long hours, chasing promotions and raises, because that's how I showed love, by providing. Elena and I would take Emma to church occasionally, primarily for holidays, or when my mom guilted us into it. But faith wasn't something I thought about much. I was too busy building my life, brick by brick. Then the divorce hit 3 years ago, like a wrecking ball through everything I'd built. Elena and I had grown apart. Different priorities, different dreams. She wanted more time. I wanted more success. Arguments turned into silence, and silence turned into separation. When she moved out, I was left with a half-empty house and a heart full of questions I didn't know how to answer. Emma, who was 9 then, split her weeks between us, and every time she left for her mom's, the house felt like a tomb. I threw myself into work, because that's what I knew how to do. fix problems, meet deadlines, keep moving. But late at night, when the house was quiet and Emma was asleep or gone, I'd sit on the couch with a beer, staring at the TV without really watching it. The silence was heavy, like a weight pressing down on my chest. I'd built a life that looked perfect on paper. Senior engineer, 6-figure salary, a daughter who was my whole world. But inside, I was suffocating. I stopped going to church after the divorce. God, whom I'd never really questioned as a kid, now felt like a stranger. If he were real, why had he let my marriage fall apart? Why was I waking up every day with this ache I couldn't name? I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering what the point was. I wasn't suicidal, but I wasn't really living either. I was just existing. My only anchor was Emma. Her laugh when we played board games, her questions about math homework, her hugs smelled like strawberry shampoo. Those were the only things keeping me grounded. I'd always been the guy who could fix anything. Leaky faucet, sorted in an hour, bridge design flaw. I'd stay up all night crunching numbers, but I didn't know how to fix this loneliness, this emptiness. I tried filling it with more work, a new gym routine, a few awkward dates that went nowhere. Nothing worked. I'd stand in the shower, hot water running over my face, thinking, is this it? Is this all there is? I didn't know it then, but those questions were the first whispers of something bigger, something outside of me. I just didn't know what to call it yet. Emma was my lifeline, but she was also a reminder of my failures. I wanted to be a good dad, to give her the stability I'd lost when my own family broke apart. So when she begged to attend a Christian summer camp in the Hill Country in July of 2025, I said yes. Even though the word Christian made my skin crawl, I didn't believe in that stuff anymore. But Emma was excited about horseback riding and canoeing, and I couldn't say no to her. I drove her up there, dropped her off, and headed back to Houston, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in my gut. I had no idea that decision would change everything, not just for her, but also for me. In the summer of 2025, the cracks in my life started to feel like canyons. I'd been running on fumes for years, pouring everything I had into work and being a dad to Emma. But no matter how much I gave, the hollow ache in my chest kept growing. It wasn't just sadness, it was something deeper. A part of me was missing, and no amount of overtime or Netflix binges could fill it. I was 52. By every measure I used to care about, I was successful. Career, finances, reputation, and all boxes were checked. But still, night after night, I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling fan spinning in the dark, wondering why none of it was enough. It crept in slowly, like splinters under my skin. I'd sit at my desk, reviewing blueprints for a new overpass, and my mind would wander. I'd think about my parents, how they used to pray before meals, their voices soft and steady, like they were talking to someone real, someone who listened. I hadn't prayed in years, not since the divorce flipped my life upside down. Back then, I'd begged God to save my marriage, to make Elena stay. But when she left, it felt like God turned his back on me, and I turned mine on him. It stung when I thought of those quiet prayers from my childhood. Not just because I'd lost my marriage, but because I'd lost something deeper, a sense of meaning I couldn't quite name. One evening, I was at a bar with some coworkers. The kind of place with sticky tables and neon lights buzzing in the corner. They laughed about a project we'd just wrapped, but my mind was elsewhere. I kept thinking about something Emma had asked me a few nights earlier. "Dad, do you think God's mad at us?" She was only 12, but somehow she'd picked up on my bitterness, my silence when it came to anything spiritual. I mumbled something about God probably having bigger things to worry about, hoping the question would disappear. But it didn't. Her words stuck with me. Was God mad at us? Was I mad at him? Or worse, was I shouting into a void that didn't answer back? I tried to outrun it. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects, chasing bigger contracts. I thought maybe the questions would stop if I stayed busy enough, but they followed me. I get into the car on my morning commute. I wandered into the grocery store aisles where I was lost in thought, into the quiet house when Emma was at her mom's. I'd see couples holding hands, families laughing together, people who seemed whole, and I'd wonder what they have that I don't. Is it peace? Purpose? Something bigger than themselves? I'd always been the guy who fixed things, but this wasn't a problem I could solve with a calculator or a wrench. Then came the moment that cracked something open inside me. It was a Saturday night. Emma was at her mom's. I was alone in the house, flipping through TV channels, when I stumbled on a documentary about near-death experiences. One guy, a construction worker, talked about flatlining after a car accident. He said that he felt this overwhelming love in those moments, like someone was holding him. He called it God, and it changed everything for him. I turned the TV off, but I couldn't shake his story. I stood alone in my kitchen, the fridge's hum filling the silence, and for the first time in years, I whispered, "God, if you're there, why can't I feel you?" No lightning bolts, no voices from the sky, just silence. But asking the question felt like cracking a door open, just a sliver. That crack widened when I dropped Emma off at a Christian summer camp in the hill country. I didn't want her to go, not because I didn't trust the camp, but because it meant a week without her. She was my anchor. But her eyes lit up as she talked about campfires and Bible stories, and I couldn't say no. Driving back to Houston, the radio off, the road stretching out under a vast Texas sky, I felt a pang of something I couldn't name. Was it jealousy? Longing? I pictured Emma singing songs about a God I no longer believed in, and my chest tightened. What if she found something I couldn't? What if I were the one missing out? By the time July rolled around, that restlessness was a constant companion. I'd walk into meetings, shake hands, smile for the clients, but inside, I was unraveling. I Googled things late at night. How to find purpose. Does God exist? I felt ridiculous, like a teenager searching for answers on the internet, but I was desperate. I tried meditation apps, self-help books, even a yoga class that made me feel like a fish out of water. Nothing worked. The hunger kept growing, and I didn't know how to feed it. Then the call came. July 4th, 2025. I was at my desk when my phone buzzed. The camp director's voice was tight, apologetic. A flash flood had swept through the hill country. Emma was missing. My world stopped. That hunger I'd been wrestling with turned into a scream. I didn't know if God was real, but I knew I needed someone bigger than me. I grabbed my keys, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. and drove toward the camp, praying for the first time in years, not because I believed, but because I had nothing else left. The drive to the hill country was a blur. Rain hammered my windshield, and the wipers barely kept up. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles ached, and my mind was a storm of its own. Emma, my little girl, was out there somewhere in the flood. It was July 4th, 2025, and the Texas sky was unloading its fury, turning roads into rivers and my heart into a battlefield. I hadn't prayed in years, but as I sped toward the camp, words spilled out of me like water from a broken dam. Please, God, if you're there, don't take her. Don't let her be gone. My voice cracked, raw and desperate, echoing in the empty cab of my truck. I reached the camp just after midnight, pulling into a muddy parking lot lit by flashing emergency lights. Search and rescue teams were already there, their radios crackling, their faces grim under dripping raincoats. The camp director, a woman named Sarah with kind eyes and a tired voice, met me at the edge of the chaos. "We're doing everything we can, Michael," she said, her hand resting gently on my arm. Emma was with a group near the river when the flood hit. They found most of the kids, but she and 2 others are still missing. Her words hit like a punch, stealing my breath. I wanted to scream, to run into the woods and find her myself, but I could only nod and follow her to a tent where volunteers handed out coffee and blankets. The tent smelled like wet canvas and stale coffee. The air was thick with worry. Parents huddled together, some crying, some staring blankly at the ground. I stood apart, my boots caked in mud, my heart pounding so loud I could feel it in my ears. I didn't know how to be there, how to wait while my daughter was lost. I kept picturing Emma's face, crooked smile, and how she'd tuck her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. I'd always been the guy who fixed things, but this, I was helpless. Sarah handed me a styrofoam cup of coffee, and I took it, just to have something to hold on to. She sat down next to me, her voice soft but steady. "Michael, I know this is unbearable, but can I pray with you?" I froze. Prayer felt like a betrayal of the anger I'd carried for years. But I was drowning, and her offer felt like a lifeline. I nodded, barely able to speak. She took my hand, her fingers warm against my cold skin, and began to pray. "Father, you see Emma. You know where she is. Please guide the searchers to her. Give Michael strength. Let him feel your presence." Her words were simple, but they hit me like a wave, stirring something deep inside. As she prayed, I closed my eyes. And for the first time, I didn't fight the idea of God. I let myself imagine him, not as the distant figure I'd blamed for my divorce, but as someone who could hear me. Who cares? I saw Emma in my mind, safe, wrapped in a blanket, her laugh filling the air. My chest loosened just a little, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. A flicker of peace, like a warm hand resting on my shoulder. I didn't know if it was God or just desperation, but it was enough to keep me from falling apart. Hours passed. Each one was heavier than the last. Around 3 a.m., a shout went up from the riverbank. I ran out of the tent, heart in my throat, slipping in the mud as I pushed through the crowd. A rescuer was carrying a small figure wrapped in a foil blanket, Emma. She was shivering, her face pale, but she was alive. I dropped to my knees in the mud and pulled her into my arms. her wet hair sticking to my cheek. "Dad," she whispered, her voice small but steady. "I knew you'd find me." I held her tighter, tears mixing with the rain on my face, and whispered, "Thank you, God." It wasn't planned. It wasn't rehearsed. It just came out, like it had been waiting there all along. Later, in the warmth of a rescue tent, Emma told me what happened. She'd been swept downstream, but grabbed a tree branch, holding on for hours until a counselor found her. "I was scared, Dad," she said, her eyes wide, "but I kept praying, like they taught us at camp. I asked God to keep me safe, and He did." Her words pierced me. She'd trusted God when I couldn't. And somehow, He answered. Sitting by Emma's cot as she slept that night, I opened a Bible someone had left in the tent. My hands shook as I flipped to Psalm 23, a verse my mom used to read to me as a kid. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." The words landed differently now, like they were written just for me. I saw myself on that muddy riverbank, lost, desperate, afraid, and I realized God had been there, not just for Emma, but for me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew I'd met Him not in a church, not in a sermon, but in the rain, in the fear, in the moment my daughter was given back to me. Coming home from the hill country, with Emma safe in the back seat, felt like waking up from a nightmare. The flood had shaken me, but so had that moment in the rescue tent when I whispered, "Thank you, God," like it was the most natural thing in the world. For a guy who'd spent 3 years blaming God for everything that went wrong, that was a seismic shift. But if I thought finding faith would be like flipping a switch, I was dead wrong. Those first steps back toward God were messy, clumsy, and full of doubts I didn't expect. The morning after we got home, I heard Emma humming a camp song in the kitchen, pouring cereal like nothing had happened. I stood in the doorway, watching her, my heart still raw from the fear of losing her. I wanted to hold on to that flicker of peace I'd felt by the riverbank, but I didn't know how. I'd spent so long building walls around my heart, anger at God, bitterness over the divorce, that trusting Him again felt like learning to walk on a broken leg. I started small. I pulled out an old Bible from a box in the garage, its pages yellowed and smelling faintly of dust. I'd bought it for Emma's first communion years ago, when faith was just part of the family routine. Sitting at my kitchen table, I opened to Psalm 23 again, the words still fresh from that night in the tent. "He restores my soul." I read it out loud, my voice low so Emma wouldn't hear. The words felt heavy, like they were trying to sink into me. But my mind kept fighting back. Restore my soul? Then why do I still feel so broken? Frustrated, I closed the book. I wanted to believe, but doubt was a stubborn tenet, and it wasn't moving out easily. Prayer was even harder. I'd try at night, after Emma was asleep, kneeling by my bed like I'd seen my mom do when I was a kid, but the words felt awkward, like I was talking to a stranger. "God, I don't know if you're listening," I'd start, then trail off, my thoughts spiraling. What was I supposed to say? Was I doing it wrong? I'd end up staring at the ceiling, my knees aching, wondering if I was just talking to myself. But occasionally, I'd feel that flicker again, a warmth in my chest, like someone was there, waiting for me to keep going. The church was another hurdle. Emma begged to go to the camp's Sunday service. A week later, a reunion for the kids and families affected by the flood. I didn't want to go. Churches felt like museums of my old life, full of memories I'd rather avoid. But Emma's eyes lit up when she talked about it, so I gave in. Walking into that small chapel, I felt like an imposter. The music was loud. The people were warm. But I kept my arms crossed, my jaw tight. A woman named Carla, one of the camp counselors, recognized me and gave me a hug that caught me off guard. "God brought Emma back to you," she said, her eyes shining. I mumbled a thanks, but inside I was wrestling. Did God really do that? Or was it just luck? I wanted to believe it was Him, but part of me still wasn't sure. Old habits didn't go quietly. I'd always used work to numb my pain. And even after the flood, I caught myself slipping back into that pattern. I'd stay late at the office, burying myself in spreadsheets because it was easier than sitting with my questions about God. I snapped at Emma one night when she asked why I wasn't home for dinner. The hurt in her eyes gutted me, and I realized I was still trying to fix things my way. Control, hustle, and repeat. That night, I prayed again. This time, I'm asking for help to let go of the need to have all the answers. It wasn't a perfect prayer, but it was honest. And for now, that was enough. There were small victories, too. One Sunday, I went to church with Emma without her begging. I didn't sing, but I listened. When the pastor read from John 16:33, "In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world," something clicked. I'd had plenty of trouble, but the idea that Jesus had overcome it, that He was bigger than my pain, stuck with me. I jotted the verse down on a bulletin and tucked it in my wallet. I'd pull it out when the doubts crept back in. Not everyone understood the change. My ex-wife, Elena, raised an eyebrow when I mentioned attending church. "Since when are you religious again?" she asked, her tone sharp. I didn't have a good answer, just that something was different. Even if I couldn't explain it yet, some of my coworkers noticed too. One guy, Dave, teased me when I passed on happy hour to take Emma to a youth group event. "What, you holy roller now?" He laughed. I shrugged it off, but it stung. I wasn't trying to be anything, just trying to figure out what this new pull toward God meant. The biggest help came from unexpected places. Carla, the camp counselor, texted me a week after the reunion, inviting me to a men's Bible study at her church. I almost said no, but something about her kindness made me show up. The group was small, just a handful of guys in a church basement, drinking bad coffee and talking about their lives. They weren't preachy. They were real. Guys who'd lost jobs, marriages, even kids, and were still wrestling with faith. One of them, a retired firefighter named Tom, shared how he'd found God after years of drinking to forget his pain. "It's not about being perfect," he said. "It's about showing up." That stuck with me. I didn't have to have it all figured out. I just had to keep showing up. By the end of that summer, I was still a mess of doubts and hopes, but I was moving forward. I'd sometimes pray with Emma before bed, her small hand in mine, and it felt like a bridge between my old life and something new. I didn't have all the answers, but I wasn't running from the questions for the first time in years. I was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, God was walking with me through the mess. Stepping into faith was like learning to walk on unsteady ground. One moment, I felt steady, The next, I was stumbling. By the fall of 2025, I was starting to see God as more than a last resort in a crisis. But letting that faith spill into the rest of my life, that was a whole different challenge. I was still Michael Rodriguez, the practical engineer who liked clean answers and predictable outcomes. But faith didn't work like a blueprint. It was messy, and it demanded I show up differently, not just in my heart, but in the world I'd spent years building. The first time I had to explain my faith was at a family barbecue at my sister's house that September. My family, loud and loving, had always been Catholic. But after my divorce, I dodged their invitations to Mass or Rosary nights. Sitting around picnic tables piled with carnitas and cornbread that day, my mom noticed the small cross necklace I'd started wearing, a gift from Emma after camp. "Mijo, you're back with God?" she asked, her eyes hopeful but cautious. The table went quiet. Forks paused midair. I felt my face heat up, like I was under a spotlight. "I'm trying," I said, my voice low. Something happened when Emma was missing. I don't know how to explain it, but I'm figuring it out. My sister Rosa raised an eyebrow, but didn't push. My dad just nodded, like he'd been waiting for this moment. Later, Mom pulled me aside, her hands cupping my face like I was a kid again. "God never left you, Michael," she said. Her words felt like a hug and a challenge all at once. Work was trickier. I'd spent 20 years in a world of deadlines and data, where faith wasn't exactly water cooler talk. But one Monday, during lunch break, my co-worker Dave asked why I'd skipped our usual happy hours. I could have brushed it off, but something in me didn't want to hide. "I've been going to a Bible study," I said, stirring my coffee, bracing for the ribbing. Dave laughed, half joking. "What, you praying over your spreadsheets now?" I forced a smile, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. "It's not like that," I said. "It's just, I'm trying to be a better dad, a better person. This helps." He didn't push, but I could tell he didn't get it. That conversation stuck with me, not because it was profound, but because it was the first time I'd owned my faith out loud where it felt risky. Then there was Elena. Co-parenting with my ex-wife was civil, but distant, like navigating a minefield with careful steps. When I picked Emma up one weekend, I mentioned we'd been attending church together. Elena's eyes narrowed, and her arms crossed. "So, this is your new thing? Dragging Emma into it?" Her tone was sharp, like I'd crossed a line. I wanted to snap back, but I took a breath, remembering how Tom at Bible study talked about responding with grace. "It's not about dragging her," I said. "She loves it, and it's helping me too. I just want her to know there's something bigger out there." Elena didn't say much after that, but I could see the wheels turning. It wasn't a win, but it wasn't a fight either. For us, that was progress. The real test came at work a few weeks later. My firm was bidding on a big project, a highway expansion that would have meant a fat bonus and a step toward partner. But the more I dug into the details, the more uneasy I felt. The environmental impact report highlighted some serious concerns, such as wetland destruction and community displacement. In the past, I would have justified it. Progress always had a cost. But now, I couldn't shake a verse from Bible study, Micah 6:8. "What does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy." It wouldn't leave me alone. At the project meeting, I spoke up, pointing out the issues and suggesting we revise the plan. My boss, usually a fan of my get-it-done attitude, wasn't thrilled. "You're overthinking it, Rodriguez," he said, his voice clipped. I held my ground, heart pounding, knowing I might be taking my shot at a promotion. "I just think we need to do this right," I said. The room went quiet. I felt every pair of eyes on me. We revised the plan, but I knew I'd ruffled feathers. That night, driving home, I felt a strange mix of fear and peace. I'd chosen faith over comfort, and it didn't feel like a loss. Emma was my anchor through it all. She'd come home from a youth group with questions about heaven and forgiveness that forced me to dig deeper. One night, she asked, "Dad, do you think God forgives everything?" We were on the couch, eating popcorn, the TV muted. I thought about my years of anger, my doubts, the way I'd pushed God away. "I hope so," I said, my throat tight, "because I'm counting on it." She leaned against me, her head on my shoulder. At that moment, I felt like maybe I was doing something right. Living my faith publicly wasn't about preaching or waving a Bible around. It was in the small choices, speaking up when it was hard, being honest about my journey, and showing Emma a dad trying to live differently. Some people got it, some didn't. But for the first time, I wasn't hiding who I was becoming. I was learning to stand in my faith, not because it was easy, but because it was real. Faith didn't just change the way I prayed or showed up at church. It rewrote the map of my life. By the winter of 2025, I wasn't the same Michael Rodriguez who'd stared into the void after my divorce, or even the man who'd begged God for a miracle during the flood. The changes weren't loud or flashy. There was no movie montage where everything fell into place. They were slow, stubborn, and deep. Like roots breaking through concrete. God was reshaping me, not just in my head, but in my heart, habits, and how I saw the world. Before, I was a guy who carried anger like a second skin. It wasn't loud rage. I wasn't yelling at people in traffic. It was a quiet bitterness that colored everything. I resented Elena for leaving, resented God for letting it happen, resented myself for not being enough. That anger showed up in small ways. Snapping at Emma when I was stressed, shutting down when coworkers asked how I was doing, nursing grudges over little things. But as I leaned into faith, I started noticing a shift. One night, I was reading Matthew 6:14. "If you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you." The words hit me hard, like a mirror held up to my heart. I realized I was holding on to pain that was holding me back. I started praying for Elena, not just for co-parenting peace, but for her happiness. It felt awkward at first, like forcing a rusty hinge open. But one day, when I picked Emma up, Elena mentioned she was struggling with a new job. Instead of my usual tight-lipped nod, I said, "I'll pray for you." Her eyes widened, but she just said, "Thanks." It wasn't a big moment, but it was a start. Over time, that prayer softened me. I stopped seeing Elna as the source of my pain and started seeing her as someone God loved, just like me. Our conversations got easier, and Emma noticed. "You and Mom don't fight as much," she said one day, grinning. That was worth more than any promotion. Another change was in my anxiety. As an engineer, I'd always prided myself on controlling and solving problems before they happened. But after the divorce, worry became my constant shadow. I'd lie awake, heart racing, imagining worst-case scenarios, losing my job, Emma getting hurt, failing her as a dad. After the flood, I clung to Philippians 4:6-7. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. I'd repeat it like a lifeline, especially when panic crept in. One night, facing a crushing work deadline, I prayed instead of pacing. I felt my shoulders relax. My breath is steady. The peace wasn't instant or perfect, but it was real. A quiet assurance that I didn't have to carry it all alone. My priorities shifted too. Work used to be my identity. Every project, every promotion was a brick in the wall of my worth. But faith gave me a new lens. I still worked hard, but I stopped chasing titles like they defined me. Instead, I poured more into Emma, listening when she talked about her day, taking her to youth groups, or just watching silly movies together. I started volunteering at church, helping with maintenance projects. I couldn't lead a Bible study, but could fix a leaky pipe faster than most. One Saturday, as I tightened bolts on a church playground, a dad thanked me, saying his kids loved it. I felt a warmth in my chest. Not pride, but purpose, something bigger than a paycheck. Relationships changed in ways I didn't expect. My sister Rosa, who has always been my cheerleader, started coming to church with me and Emma. We'd sit together, sharing a hymnal, and I'd catch her wiping tears during the sermon. "I didn't know how much I needed this," she told me once. Even my dad, a man of few words, started opening up about his faith, sharing stories of how he'd leaned on God during tough times. Those moments felt like gifts, like God was weaving my family back together, not the way it used to be, but into something new and beautiful. Maybe the biggest change was joy. Not the fleeting kind from a good day at work or Emma's laugh, but a deeper joy that didn't depend on circumstances. I'd be driving home, the Houston skyline glowing against the dusk, and feel a lightness I hadn't known in years. It wasn't that life was perfect. Doubt still crept in. I still had days when I felt like a failure, but I knew I wasn't alone. Psalm 16:11 kept returning to me. In your presence, there is fullness of joy. I was starting to believe it, not just in my head, but in my bones. I'm not saying I became a saint. I still got frustrated in traffic, still worried about bills, still fumbled through prayers some nights. But the difference was, I wasn't fighting alone anymore. God was in the mess with me, changing me one small choice at a time. I started to see my life not as a problem to solve, but as a story He was writing. One where love, forgiveness, and purpose were becoming the main characters. Today, as I sit in my Houston kitchen, the morning sun filtering through the blinds, I'm still Michael Rodriguez, the engineer, the dad, the guy who likes his coffee black and his blueprints precisely. But I'm also someone new, someone learning to live with faith as my compass, not just a lifeline for emergencies. My story isn't finished, and I'm far from it. but it's unfolding in ways I never could have planned, pointing me toward a purpose bigger than myself. If you were sitting across from me now, maybe with your coffee, wondering if God can meet you in your own mess, let me tell you what this looks like today and how it keeps growing. Faith is a daily rhythm now, not a one-time event. I spend a few quiet minutes with my Bible every morning, usually while Emma's still asleep down the hall. I'm no scholar. Sometimes it's just a verse or two, like John 15:5, where Jesus says, "Apart from me, you can do nothing." I need that reminder when my instinct is to control everything. Prayer is part of it too, though I'm still figuring it out. I talk to God like He's in the room. Sometimes about Emma, sometimes about work. Sometimes I wonder about the doubts that still sneak in. It's not fancy, but it's real, and it keeps me grounded. One of the biggest ways I live my faith is by serving others. Last spring, I started helping with the youth group at church, not because I'm some spiritual giant, but because I saw how much it meant to Emma. I'm the guy who sets up chairs or drives kids to retreats, but being around those teens, watching them wrestle with big questions like I did, feels like holy ground. One night, a kid named Javier told me he felt like God didn't care about him because his dad was in jail. I didn't have a perfect answer, but I shared how I'd felt abandoned during my divorce and how God showed up for me in the flood. His eyes softened, and I realized my story wasn't just mine. It was a way to help others see they're not alone. Emma's still my biggest teacher. She's 13 now, full of questions and dreams, and her faith challenges mine. Last week, she asked why bad things happen if God loves us. We were eating tacos at our favorite food truck, the air thick with the smell of grilled onions and cilantro. I fumbled through an answer about free will and God's bigger plan. Then I just admitted, "I don't know everything, kiddo, but I know He's with us." She nodded, satisfied, and I realized that's what faith looks like for me now. Showing up, even when I don't have all the answers, trusting God's still writing the story. My relationships keep evolving. Elena and I aren't best friends, but we're better. We talk more openly about Emma, and I've stopped carrying old grudges. My sister Rosa and I pray together sometimes, bringing us closer than we've been in years. Even at work, I'm different. I listen more, push for fairness in projects, try to see my coworkers as people God loves, not just colleagues. Dave, the guy who teased me about Bible study, asked me about it recently after going through his rough patch. I didn't preach. I just shared a bit of my story. Maybe it planted a seed. Maybe not. I'm learning to leave that part to God. I'm still growing, still stumbling. Some days I get impatient. Some days I let worry creep back in. But I'm learning to lean into God's and my own grace. I used to think faith meant having it all together. Now it's about trusting God in the middle of the mess. For example, when I'm frustrated in Houston traffic, and I'm frustrated, I catch myself praying instead of cursing. Or when I read Psalm 139, "You have searched me, Lord, and you know me," and feel seen in a way I never did before. My story's not about arriving at some perfect destination. It's about walking one step at a time with a God who doesn't give up on me. If you're reading this, maybe you know what it's like to feel lost, to wonder if there's more to life than what you're holding. I get it. I've been there staring into the dark, wondering if God's listening. But I'm here to tell you, He is. He met me in a flood, on a muddy riverbank, in the fear of losing my daughter. And He's still meeting me now, in ordinary moments, in the quiet. Applications of faith don't have to be loud or perfect. They just have to be honest. Maybe your next step is a small one, a question, a prayer, a moment of surrender. Wherever you are, there's a God who sees you, who's waiting to write the next chapter with you. All you have to do is show up.